is we haven't launched a war. If some of these folks think that it's time to launch a war, they should say so. And they should explain to the American people exactly why they would do that and what the consequences would be. Everything else is just talk.
Tom Switzer is a research associate with the United States Studies Centre and former opinion editor with the Australian newspaper. He joins us now to discuss Super Tuesday. Tom, how are you? Mitt Romney just can't get any breathing space, really, can he? He needed to win Ohio comfortably. He's won it by the barest of margins, it appears.
Look, it was a decent night for Romney in the sense that he has increased his delegate count, which is the most important thing. Not so much winning a certain state, but winning the delegates. And he won a pretty big swath of delegates, not just in Ohio, but across the Union today. But look, you're right, there are deep doubts still about his candidacy, most notably among the Conservative base in his party.
So, do all four go on from here? And how damaging is that? Because Barbara Bush has been out in the last day or so saying that it's so ugly, this race for the Republicans, certainly not to her taste. Is that ugliness going to poison the well for all of them?
Well, she should come back down to Australia and see the Australian Labor Party. I mean, no one in the Republican Party is calling Mitt Romney a psychopath or a complete and utter fraud.
I think they are, Tom.
I was going to say that.
Well, some of the voters might be, but certainly not the candidates. No, I think this will go on, and I think certainly Santorum did well enough today to more than justify staying on. Gingrich will stay on. He had a big win in Georgia. Polls showed that he'd win by double digits. He'll now have a good chance of doing well in a couple of southern states next week, Alabama and Mississippi, but I do think he is damaged goods. And as for Ron Paul, well, he will stay on, but his goal was never to win the nomination. He just wants to accumulate as many delegates as possible so he can have a say in the convention in Tampa later this year.
So when Newt Gingrich inevitably does drop out, what happens to the vote then? Does that mean that Santorum suddenly will gain momentum?
Well, I'm cautious that he will drop out. I mean, I think this is the point. Gingrich and Santorum seem quite committed to staying on at least until May, and certainly in Gingrich's case, he's got the money. He's got a couple of powerful super PACs backing him, so I suspect he will stay. But you're quite right. The fact that the anti-Romney vote is splintered, that helps Mitt Romney, and that's why he's doing reasonably well enough to win enough delegates.
The campaign leading up to Super Tuesday was dominated, from all things, by a debate over contraception. Did that help or hurt anyone in particular?
Look, I think it's a peripheral issue in the grand scheme of things. I think on balance it probably hurt Santorum, even among a lot of Conservatives, because you have to remember he had a double-digit lead going into Ohio a week ago, and when he made those remarks about contraception and John F. Kennedy and the separation of church, among other issues, I think that showed that he really wasn't up to it presidential-wise. And so even a lot of Conservatives felt uncomfortable with some of his hardline social views. You have to remember, although America is a centre-right country, ultimately to win the nomination and also, more importantly, to win the general election, you have to appeal to a lot of independents who have no truck for hardline social conservatism.
Now, Rick Santorum can give Mitt Romney a real race in Ohio, it seems. If you were to look at Ohio and if Santorum was to win the nomination as a battleground between him and Barack Obama, could he win Ohio? He'd need to, wouldn't he?
He would. In fact, the three states, whoever wins the presidential race in November, the three states they need to win are Ohio, but also Florida and Pennsylvania. They're the battleground states. I don't think that Santorum would do all that well in any of those states. Although, mind you, in the Rust Belt parts, manufacturing parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania, he would do okay, especially among the so-called Reagan Democrats, or in Australian parlance, Howard Battlers. But ultimately, I think this will be a battle between Mitt Romney for the Republicans and Barack Obama. And I think it's way too early to say who will win that battle. I mean, we're 8 months out. A lot can happen in the course of a presidential year.
But if it's all about momentum, at this stage we've had a couple of surges from each of them, but none of them seem to have any particular momentum.
Look, you're quite right, absolutely. But bear in mind, in March of 1980, Jimmy Carter had pretty big leads over the Republican candidate Ronald Reagan, and likewise in March 1992, the conventional wisdom was that George H.W. Bush would beat Bill Clinton. As we know, those first two presidents lost.
So what was behind Barack Obama's appearance today? In particular, in his anti-war or anti-hawk statements today?
Look, I think he's reading the Iran situation pretty well. I think the Republican candidates, save Ron Paul, are talking as if it's 2003. And the lesson that I think a lot of Americans have learnt from the Iraq experience is that even rogue states that have the capacity to develop WMD can be contained and deterred. Now, Obama quite understandably is not talking that language about containment because he's trying to play this diplomatic game with the Israelis, but I think he's reading it pretty well, and I don't think the Republicans recognise that Middle America don't really have an appetite for another preventive war in the middle of the Persian Gulf.
And what is that distaste for another military adventure?
Sure.
What does it come from? Is it money, or is it simply they're sick of seeing their sons coming home in caskets? What's it about?
I think there's several factors, and I think that it's certainly the money. I mean, the two wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have cost the United States more than $3 trillion, and you have to remember the resources is one thing, but the appetite, there is just no will in America to do nation building again or even preventive strikes. And I do think that President Obama is on a winner when he makes the point that nation building begins at home. In many respects, Ron Paul's talking this language, and it's not surprising that you'll even see a lot of young Republicans, centre-right characters, libertarians who are very much attracted to Ron Paul. They're obviously a minority, but they are the wave of the future. And I think that the Republican Party is having this great debate right now about foreign policy, but Gingrich, Santorum and Romney, I think, are misreading public mood.
Just in a few seconds, where do the Republicans roll on to next?
Well, this weekend they're in Kansas, which is the heart of Middle America, and then next week there are a couple of states down south. But look, this will continue throughout the rest of March, April, quite conceivably in May. So we could be having this conversation in 2 months' time.
We'll see you then, Tom Switzer.
Thanks
Thank
so much,
you very
Tim.
much for coming in.